Imagine a man dressed in a jolly red suit with a white beard as fluffy as snow. He's the one every child looks up to during Christmas. Beloved, trusted, and thought to bring joy to families everywhere. But what if I told you that this man dressed as Santa Claus wasn't bringing gifts at all? He was hiding something far darker. Something so horrific that it shattered the lives of innocent children. Behind the fake beard and twinkling eyes, he was hiding a secret. A secret that would make you rethink everything you know about the man in the red suit. The question is, could you ever trust anyone again if they could wear the face of Christmas and still do something so evil? In this video, we unravel the shocking truth behind the man who used the magic of Christmas to lure children into a nightmare that no one saw coming. Stay with us, because the story that follows will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust and terror. It was the kind of winter night that felt like a scene straight out of a Christmas movie. The year was 1978, and in the small town of Hollybrook, nestled in the quiet hills of Ohio, the air was filled with the scent of pine and the sound of holiday cheer. Snow blanketed the streets, and every house along Maple Street was lit up with festive lights, creating a magical, almost surreal atmosphere. Families gathered around their Christmas trees, children wrote letters to Santa, and carolers sang songs as they walked from door to door. Hollybrook, known for its close-knit community, had always been a place where everyone knew each other, where life felt safe, predictable, and warm. The spirit of Christmas was everywhere. Except it wasn't. At Hollybrook Elementary, the children eagerly awaited their annual Christmas party, where they would sit on Santa's lap, whisper their wishes, and take pictures. But Santa Claus, the man who had become the face of every holiday celebration in town, wasn't just any man. His name was James Jimmy Turner, a 54-year-old man who had lived in Hollybrook for years. He was the local mailman, always with a friendly smile, always at every community event, and always there when a child needed a warm hug from Santa. But what no one knew, not yet, was that behind the jolly red suit, the fake beard, and the soft, comforting voice, James Turner was hiding something much darker, something so evil it would soon tear the town apart. The first child, Amy Richardson, a sweet 8-year-old girl from Maple Street, was about to disappear without a trace, and her disappearance would set in motion a chain of events no one could have imagined. In this perfect little town, Christmas was about to turn into something far from merry. Just a few days before Christmas, on the morning of December 20th, 1978, Hollybrook was alive with excitement. Children in the town couldn't wait for the annual Christmas party at Hollybrook Elementary, where they'd get the chance to meet Santa Claus, take photos, and tell him their wildest Christmas wishes. For Amy Richardson, an 8-year-old girl with big brown eyes and a laugh that could light up any room, this was the highlight of the year. She loved everything about Christmas. Her home on Maple Street decorated with twinkling lights, the smell of gingerbread cookies in the oven, and most of all, meeting Santa. But that year, Amy's excitement would quickly turn to dread. Amy was one of the first to sit on Jimmy Turner's lap that day. As she climbed up, she gave him a hug, told him about the puppy she wanted, and smiled for the picture. She was full of innocence, filled with that pure joy only children feel around the holidays. What she didn't know was that this Santa, this man trusted by everyone in town, had other plans. Dark, twisted plans that would soon turn her world upside down. As the day went on, something strange started to happen. Amy went missing from the party. At first no one noticed. Parents were busy chatting, teachers were occupied with the chaos of the day, and the Christmas music played on, louder than the whispers of something gone wrong. It wasn't until hours later, when the final bell rang and children began to head home, that anyone realized Amy wasn't there. Her parents, John and Sarah Richardson, were frantic when they discovered their daughter wasn't waiting for them at the usual pickup spot. They searched the school, they called her friends, and when they couldn't find her, they rushed home, hoping she'd simply gotten distracted. But Amy never came home. And just like that, the calm, safe town of Hollybrook was shaken to its core. Amy Richardson, a child loved by everyone, had vanished without a trace. The local police were called in immediately, but the investigation didn't lead to any clear answers. There were no signs of forced entry at the Richardson home, no strange footprints in the snow, no clues left behind. But something felt off. Everyone was on edge, and whispers started circulating. Whispers about the last person seen with Amy, Jimmy Turner, the man who played Santa Claus for nearly every child in Hollybrook. The authorities didn't have enough to go on yet, but they couldn't ignore the possibility. Was it just a coincidence that a child went missing right after visiting him? Was it possible that Santa, someone so trusted, so beloved, could be hiding something far worse than a sleigh and reindeer? The search for Amy continued, but days passed and the town's hope began to fade. That's when the unthinkable happened. On December 23rd, only 3 days after Amy vanished, the authorities found something that would prove to be the darkest discovery Hollybrook had ever seen. They found Amy's body, hidden just outside the town in the woods near Hollybrook Creek. She had been murdered. It wasn't just her death that stunned the town, though. It was the way she had been found. The scene was chilling. Amy's body was carefully placed, as if someone wanted it to be discovered, wanted it to make a statement. And there, with her, was a piece of Santa's red suit, the very suit that Jimmy Turner wore. In that moment, Hollybrook's innocence was shattered. The Santa they had trusted, the man they had invited into their homes, was now a prime suspect in one of the most horrifying crimes the town had ever seen. But even as the authorities began to focus on Jimmy Turner, something didn't add up. Was he the one who had done this? Or was there something or someone else behind the twisted scene? The investigation was just beginning, but the town would never be the same again. The question on everyone's mind: could Santa really be the killer? In the days that followed Amy's tragic death, the entire town of Hollybrook was consumed by fear. Parents kept their children indoors, locking doors and windows, even during the daytime. The festive spirit that had once filled the town had been replaced with a sense of dread, and the holiday decorations, once symbols of joy, now felt haunted, like reminders of the nightmare that had unfolded. The police had no leads. The town's small force was overwhelmed by the scale of the tragedy, and without any clear suspects, the investigation seemed to stall. The community was left to stew in its own unease, uncertain of who to trust, wondering if the killer was still walking among them, hiding in plain sight. And that's when the whispers began. People started talking. Jimmy Turner, the man who had been Hollybrook's Santa for as long as anyone could remember, was suddenly a figure of suspicion. It wasn't an obvious leap, there was no concrete evidence to point directly to him, but there was something about him that didn't sit right. You see, in a small town like Hollybrook, everyone knew everyone, and Jimmy Turner wasn't just a man in a red suit. He was a part of the town's fabric. He'd been the mailman for over 20 years, delivering packages and letters to every home, smiling at every doorstep, offering a kind word to anyone he met. He had helped at charity events, volunteered at the local shelters, and attended every community gathering. He was, in every way, the picture of a kind, trustworthy neighbor. But was that just a front? Was that smile really just a mask, hiding something far darker beneath? As the days passed, the police began to gather more information. They spoke to witnesses from the party. Some said they'd seen Jimmy Turner acting unusually that day, nervous, perhaps even too eager to get the children to sit on his lap. One child recalled that when it was time for Amy to leave, Santa had insisted she stay just a little longer, "Stay and tell me what you really want for Christmas," he had said. That statement had struck the child's parent as odd, but in the bustle of the holiday, no one thought much of it. After all, it was Santa Claus, right? But now, looking back, those small moments took on a much darker meaning. The police also discovered something even more chilling: Jimmy's alibi. He had claimed to have been at home after the party, preparing for another event the next day. But when detectives looked deeper, they found something strange. Several people who had spoken to him that night had a different story. They didn't remember seeing him leave the school or heading home at all. He had disappeared for a period of time that no one could account for, and there was another fact that gnawed at the investigators: his absence from the search for Amy. Not once had he volunteered to help look for the missing girl. He hadn't even mentioned it when others brought it up. It was almost as if he didn't want to draw attention to himself, as if he knew something others didn't. And then came the discovery that truly set the alarm bells ringing. It wasn't long before the investigators began looking into his personal history. Jimmy Turner's past wasn't exactly a clean slate. There had been a few incidents over the years, rumors of inappropriate behavior around children. Minor things at first, inappropriate comments, a strange touch here or there, nothing that could lead to charges, but enough to raise suspicions. The town had brushed it off, of course. Jimmy was such a nice man. He'd always been there for the kids, always put on a good show as Santa. Who would ever question him? But now, those small incidents started to feel like pieces of a much bigger puzzle. The rumors were starting to make sense, and the town was beginning to realize that they had all been blind to what had been happening right under their noses. Jimmy Turner had been hiding in plain sight, using his trusted position to carry out his sickening acts. He had used his role as Santa Claus, someone everyone believed was a symbol of goodness and warmth, to get close to the children, to gain their trust, to lure them in. As the police began to dig deeper into his background, they uncovered even more disturbing details. Jimmy's former wife, who had divorced him years ago, revealed that he had always been obsessed with children, especially young girls. He would often talk about them in a way that made her uncomfortable, but she had dismissed it at the time. After all, it was just Jimmy, right? But there was more. They found photographs. Old photographs that Jimmy Turner had kept hidden. Photographs of him dressed in his Santa's suit with children, but not just any children. Children who had gone missing or died over the years. At first it seemed like coincidence, but the more they investigated, the more disturbing the connections became. The faces of the children in those photos were burned into the memory of every investigator. They had been taken years ago before Amy, but there was no denying the pattern. James Turner had been there, at the scenes, at the parties, with the kids who were later found dead or missing. The town began to shake as the truth started to piece itself together. Was Santa Claus really the killer? Was this man, this neighbor, this friendly face, really the monster hiding behind the red suit? Oh, there was still no solid proof, no concrete evidence that could charge him with anything yet, but the suspicions were overwhelming. The whispers had grown louder, the fear had set in, and soon the whole town of Hollybrook would be forced to reckon with a truth they had never believed possible. Their Santa Claus was the one they should have feared most. As the days dragged on, the investigation into Jimmy Turner began to take a darker turn. The town of Hollybrook could no longer ignore the eerie connections between him and the recent events. It wasn't just his suspicious behavior, it was everything. The more the police uncovered, the more it seemed like the man they had all trusted, Santa Claus, the man who had delivered their mail, helped with fundraisers, and even read stories to their children, had been hiding in plain sight, using his position to carry out his twisted fantasies. On December 27th, just 4 days after Amy's body was discovered, the police obtained a search warrant for Jimmy Turner's house. When they arrived at his home, tucked away on the outskirts of town, They found the place strangely neat. Too neat. The silence in the house felt oppressive, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As the officers began searching, they noticed the first thing that seemed out of place: a locked closet in the corner of the living room, a closet that Jimmy had never mentioned. They broke the lock. Inside they found something that would send chills down anyone's spine. The closet wasn't filled with toys or decorations like you'd expect in the home of someone who played Santa Claus every year. No, what they found was far worse: a collection of journals. These were not ordinary journals. Each one was filled with disturbing details about the children he had interacted with over the years. Names, dates, descriptions of the children's behavior, and sometimes things that no one should ever write about children. The officers flipped through the pages, their stomachs sinking with each line they read. Some of the entries were just innocent notes about the children, how they looked, what they wanted for Christmas, their little quirks. But others were more sinister. References to moments when he had been alone with the children, comments about their vulnerability, their fears. It was like reading the thoughts of a predator who had been waiting patiently for the right moment. And it didn't stop there. The further the officers dug, the more they found. Underneath the journals were photos, hundreds of photos. Most of them were snapshots from the Christmas parties, from parades, and from the many other community events where Jimmy had played Santa. But among them were disturbing images of children who had been missing or found dead over the years. Pictures of children, some of them smiling with him in their laps, others with a look of discomfort, as though they sensed something was wrong. The police officers recognized the faces of children whose names had appeared in the news, children whose cases had gone unsolved. It was all starting to make sense. Every child he had interacted with, every Christmas party where he had been Santa, those were the moments he'd chosen his victims. The pattern was clear now. He had been targeting the most vulnerable children in the town, using his position as Santa Claus to gain their trust, to make them feel safe. And then, when the time was right, he would strike. He had been doing this for years, long before Amy. But the darkest truth was still to come. As the police continued their search, they came across a small, hidden room in the back of the house. A room Jimmy had kept locked for years. Inside, they found more photographs, this time not of children, but of women. Women who were somehow connected to the children. There were photographs of mothers, aunts, teachers, and even neighbors, who had all unknowingly crossed paths with Jimmy. Some were taken in public, others in more private settings. Some of these women had no idea their pictures were even taken, but there they were, part of his twisted collection. It was then that the officers realized Jimmy Turner wasn't just after the children. He was targeting entire families, carefully choosing his victims, getting close to their parents and caregivers, and slowly weaving himself into their lives. He had become an invisible force in Hollybrook, trusted, admired, and never suspected. He was like a ghost in the community, moving unnoticed, until he decided the time was right. The realization hit hard. Santa Claus wasn't just a man who had abused his position. He was a predator who had been carefully planning his crimes for years, using his image as the jolly, harmless old man to conceal the darkest of secrets. And now, all of it was coming to light. But even with all the evidence, something still didn't add up. How could someone so beloved, so trusted, hide such an evil side for so long? How could they have missed the signs? Or, the answer, unfortunately, was simple, because Jimmy Turner had carefully crafted a persona that no one could see through. He knew exactly how to manipulate people, how to get close to the children he preyed on without raising suspicion. And once he had them, he knew how to take them, how to silence them. But Jimmy Turner didn't know one thing. The town of Hollybrook was waking up to the truth. And now, it wasn't just the police who were searching for answers. The entire community was on edge, terrified of what might happen next. They had trusted him for years, and now that trust had been shattered. The fear in Hollybrook was palpable. As the investigation unfolded, people began asking a chilling question that no one had dared to ask before. How many children had he hurt over the years? And how long had he been hiding in plain sight? As the days turned into weeks, the town of Hollybrook continued to tremble in fear. The shocking discoveries inside Jimmy Turner's house had already turned the entire community upside down. But even with all the evidence, the journals, the photographs, the hidden room, it still wasn't enough to make the police feel certain about everything. They needed more. And then, just when it seemed like the investigation was hitting a dead end, the final crime occurred. The crime that would make everything fall into place and reveal the true depth of Jimmy Turner's monstrosity. It happened on January 4th, 1979. Just a few days after the town had begun to feel the full weight of the truth. The cold winter air had settled in, and people were starting to return to their routines, still shaken, but trying to move on. The holidays were over, and the town was trying to find some sense of normalcy again. But deep down, everyone knew that normalcy would never come again. That evening, a new report came in from a nearby town. A child had gone missing. Her name was Emily Carter, a 10-year-old girl from Brookside, a neighboring town about 30 miles away. Emily was last seen walking home from school when she disappeared without a trace. The police immediately began the search, but the details were disturbingly familiar. Like Amy Richardson before her, Emily had been alone when she vanished. She had been seen walking past a small store, her parents expecting her home in just a few minutes, but then she never arrived. At first, the connection wasn't obvious. After all, Emily wasn't from Hollybrook, but there was one detail that stood out: the store she had been walking past. It was near a gas station where Jimmy Turner had been spotted just hours before Emily disappeared. The townspeople's worst fears began to resurface. Could it be possible? Was this a coincidence, or was there a darker force at play? As the investigation into Emily's disappearance unfolded, the police made a chilling discovery. Jimmy Turner's name kept coming up, not directly, but the signs were there. His alibi for that afternoon was shaky at best, and when the police checked his car, they found something that sent a cold shiver down their spines. A lock of Emily Carter's hair tucked into an envelope, hidden beneath the seat. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The moment they made this connection, everything changed. No one had ever suspected Emily Carter would be another victim of Jimmy Turner. They thought they had uncovered all his crimes. But Emily's disappearance proved that they had underestimated the monster lurking in their midst. Within hours, the police began retracing Jimmy's steps, trying to piece together where he had been and who he had seen. They were certain now he had abducted Emily, just like he had done with Amy, and this time they weren't going to let him slip away. It didn't take long before a search team arrived at Hollybrook Creek, the same wooded area where Amy's body had been found. The place had become a haunting symbol of the horror that had unfolded in the town. The search was methodical. Officers combed the woods, checking every possible spot where a body could be hidden. And then, hours into the search, a cry rang out. A team member had found something. A body, half buried in the snow, near the creek. The body wasn't Emily, but the moment they looked closer, they realized something that stopped them dead in their tracks. It was another child. A child who had been missing for years. A child whose disappearance had never been solved. The body was that of Jessica Fuller, a 7-year-old girl who had disappeared in 1974. Her case had gone cold. There were no leads, no suspects, nothing to explain where she had gone. But now it all made sense. Jessica had been one of Jimmy Turner's earliest victims. He had taken her when she was just a child, and he had hidden her body in the same woods where Amy's had been left. The truth was more horrifying than anyone had imagined. Jimmy Turner hadn't just murdered Amy Richardson and Emily Carter. He had been killing children for years, and he had been hiding their bodies in the same place, right under everyone's noses. The town of Hollybrook was finally starting to understand the full extent of the nightmare they had been living in. But as the police pieced together the timeline of events, they realized just how long Jimmy had been operating. Jessica Fuller's body was the final piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that Jimmy Turner's spree had started long before anyone realized. When the police finally caught up to him, Jimmy Turner didn't resist. He was arrested without incident, but he showed no remorse. In fact, when they asked him about his crimes, he simply shrugged, as if he were discussing the weather. "I did what I had to do," he said, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. But as they dug into his psyche, they began to unravel a twisted web of manipulation and control. Jimmy Turner had been hiding in plain sight, using his trusted role of Santa Claus to lure children away from their families. He had been so careful, so methodical, that no one had ever suspected him. He was the Santa that every child wanted to believe in. He was the friend, the helper, the kind man who would give you candy and listen to your Christmas wishes. I wondered, but under that red suit he was a predator, hiding in plain sight, for years, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the full scope of his crimes became known, the town was left in shock. How many children had he hurt? How many families had he destroyed? The answers were horrifying, and the town of Hollybrook would never be the same again. The final crime, the murder of Emily Carter, had uncovered the truth, but at the cost of more innocent lives. It had been the tipping point that exposed Jimmy Turner for the monster he truly was, and finally brought an end to the terror he had inflicted on so many. But for Hollybrook, the pain would never go away. Christmas, once a time of joy and celebration, would forever be stained with the memories of the man who had hidden behind the mask of Santa Claus. The moment the police arrested Jimmy Turner, it was as if the entire town of Hollybrook took a collective breath they didn't know they had been holding. The man who had been Santa Claus for so many years, the friendly neighbor, the trusted figure in their community, he was no longer just a suspect. He was the monster they had all failed to see. When they took him into custody, there was no fight, no resistance. Jimmy didn't shout, cry, or beg. He was completely calm, almost unnervingly so, as the officers cuffed him and led him away. His eyes were vacant, as though he were detached from everything happening around him. The reporters standing outside the police station said he looked less like a man who had just been accused of monstrous crimes, and more like someone waiting for a bus. It was a sight that unsettled everyone, even more than his arrest itself. As Jimmy sat in the back of the police car, staring out of the window, it was clear he wasn't surprised. He didn't seem to fully grasp the magnitude of his actions. For him, it was all over. But for Hollybrook, the nightmare was just beginning. The grief that swept through the town was immense. Parents locked doors, not knowing whom to trust anymore. Christmas decorations, once a symbol of joy, now felt like reminders of the horror that had unfolded. Trust had been shattered, and no one was sure how to piece it all back together. It wasn't just about the horror of discovering Santa Claus wasn't real. It was about realizing the person they had let into their homes, the man they had trusted for years, had secretly been a predator. The community started to reflect on all the times they had welcomed him, all the moments when they had believed in the harmless image he projected. How had they missed the signs? How could they not have seen the darkness behind that friendly smile? Then came the survivors, the brave children who for years had carried the weight of their trauma in silence. Now they spoke out. For the first time they shared their stories, detailing how Santa had made them feel uncomfortable, how he'd touched them in ways that no one should ever touch a child. Their courage to speak up revealed just how deep Jimmy's manipulations had gone. Taking care of their Santa it was a devastating realization. For years he had been living a double life, playing the role of a beloved Santa Claus, while secretly destroying the lives of the very children who trusted him. The trial that followed was a national spectacle, drawing attention from all over the country. News outlets, shocked by the truth, documented every detail as the people of Hollybrook waited for answers. Inside the courtroom, there was no relief. The only thing left was the grief in the eyes of the victims' families. The parents who had once trusted him were now left to ask themselves the same painful question. How could they not have seen it? When the verdict came, it wasn't a surprise. Jimmy Turner was convicted on multiple counts of murder, abduction, and abuse. But the conviction couldn't undo the years of suffering, the lives that had been torn apart, and the trust that had been broken. No amount of justice could bring back the children he had stolen from their families. Even after the trial, Hollybrook never felt the same. The scars left by Santa Claus, the man who had hidden in plain sight, were too deep. Christmas would forever be tainted by the horrors of what had happened. The town would try to heal, but the shadow of Jimmy Turner's crimes would hang over them for years to come. In the end, the story of Jimmy Turner was a stark reminder of how easily evil can hide behind a mask of kindness, how trust can be used as a weapon, and how sometimes the very people we rely on the most are the ones we should fear the most. As the years passed, the town of Hollybrook would never be the same. The horror that had unfolded there, the dark truth behind the figure of Santa Claus, left a permanent scar on the community. Jimmy Turner had woven himself into the fabric of their lives for so long that when his true nature was exposed, it shattered everything. Trust, safety, and childhood innocence, once taken for granted, had been stolen piece by piece. For the families who lost their children, for the survivors who had to carry the weight of their experiences, there was no way to move on fully. How do you heal from a betrayal so deep? How do you erase the memory of a man who wore a mask of kindness while secretly tearing lives apart? The town tried to rebuild, to find some sense of peace, but the shadow of Santa Claus lingered over everything. Christmas, the holiday that once symbolized joy, love, and warmth, became something darker for them. It was no longer just a time for presents and celebration. It became a reminder of what had been taken from them, of the trust they had misplaced in the man who was supposed to represent the very essence of good. But even after everything that happened, a question remained. How did they not see it sooner? How could such a trusted figure, someone who had been a part of their lives for years, turn out to be the monster they never suspected? How many other communities, towns, or families had blindly trusted someone in a similar way? How many of us take for granted the people who are supposed to protect us? Now, as the truth is finally out, we're left to reflect. In a world where we often feel safe, where we trust the people closest to us, how do we recognize the signs of true evil? And, perhaps more importantly, how do we protect our loved ones, our children, from the people who would hide their darkness behind a smile? What do you think? Could the signs have been caught earlier? Could Jimmy Turner have been stopped sooner, before he became a nightmare for so many families? Or is it just impossible to see the darkness in someone you trust completely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you think this story is a reminder of how easily we can overlook the signs of evil, don't forget to like and share this video. If you want more stories like this one, the kind that open our eyes to the hidden dangers around us, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because the truth doesn't always reveal itself so easily, and sometimes we need to keep looking. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and never forget, the most dangerous monsters often wear the best masks.